another team that has been red hot lately, the New York Rangers. Jon Chik of Locked On Rangers joins us to discuss their turnaround after a slow start this season.
Locked On NHL, your daily podcast on the National Hockey League. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, Gil Martin back with you here on Locked On NHL, and thanks for making Locked On NHL your first listen every day. We are free and available on all platforms, and right now, rare that a guy who covers the Islanders gets to say this about a guy who covers the Rangers, but it's my pleasure to welcome back Jon Chik of Locked On New York Rangers. And John, how you doing today?
Well, Gil, I'm doing fantastic, not the least of which is due to the fact that the Rangers are 4-1-1 as opposed to last season when they started 1-4-1, had all kinds of drama with Tony DeAngelo and some other things as well. Very tumultuous season last year, and not looking so great for 2 games this year, 0-1-1, but they go on this road trip. They win all 4 games. I don't know that they necessarily deserve to win all 4, but here we are. It's a 4-game win streak very early in the season, so I'm feeling pretty good, Gil.
Better to feel good about the winning streak that you may or may not have deserved than to feel bad about outplaying people and losing games. What was the big difference? I mean, I saw the season opener for the Rangers. They looked shaky as anything. Didn't look so great in the second game either, and now 4 in a row. What's been the turnaround?
I mean, you have to start with Igor Shesterkin. He's been absolutely fantastic. I realize they don't give out awards and Veznas and things like that 5 or 6 games into the season. If they did, though, I think he'd be right up there with any goalie in hockey. I mean, I haven't seen every single game, and I don't know everybody's stat line off the top of my head, but I have a really hard time believing there are 2 big goalies out there that have played better than him. His lateral movement, I mean, he goes east and west just so well. He's got a great glove hand. And something that's really kind of stood out through this 4-game winning streak here, and just for reference, he played the first 3 of these wins. Alex Georgiev got the last one. But, I mean, he is so good at handling deflections. I mean, there have been some really tough deflections against the Canadians and the Maple Leafs in particular, where, I mean, it looks like this puck is going into the back of the net, and he just adjusts at the last second. He's just never caught out of position, and he's just done an absolutely fantastic job. So I think you really have to start with Igor Shesterkin. On top of that, I think it's just a case of just kind of hanging in these games. They've been tough physical games. And Gil, I know you follow, this whole league, and the Rangers' MO this offseason was to get bigger, tougher, nastier, all that good stuff. I think the Rangers did that, and I think that's kind of showing up in some of these wins here, because the Rangers have yet to play a game this season where they've scored more than 3 goals. So they're finding other ways to get it done. It starts with Igor Shesterkin, but some character, gritty wins early in the season. So if you're a Ranger fan, you have to like that, and it certainly beats last season when they started 1-4-1 as opposed to 4-1-1. So good start here.
Chris Kreider, 4 goals so far this season. He's so streaky historically. What's he doing well so far, and do you think he can get a little bit more consistent, or is Chris Kreider what we've seen so far?
Well, coming into the season, I kind of did this series where I looked at best case scenarios and worst case scenarios for every player on the Rangers. And his was actually one of the easiest to put together because, to your point, Gil, we know by now, I mean, he's 30 years old. I get the feeling that it's always kind of going to be like this. He's just streaky. When he gets on one of his hot streaks like he is right now, he can be as good or better than any player in the NHL. I mean, he can really be an elite player. And then he has these stretches where you barely notice him. This season, all of his goals, I think all 4 of them, at least 3, if not all 4, have come on tip-in goals from the front of the net. I mean, he does such a great job when the Rangers are on the power play, and the power play has really struggled this season. I believe now, let me think, they are now 3 for 24 on the power play. All 3 of the power play goals have been a result of Chris Kreider tip-in goals. So, I mean, that's just kind of what he brings to the table. He's going to be hot and cold. We come to accept that as Ranger fans. I think that he's still in the mix to ultimately be the New York Rangers captain at some point. And I've always kind of floated the idea, first of all, he'd be my choice to be the Ranger captain. But part of the reason for that is I think if he's the captain, it just gives him a little bit more of a sense of purpose, maybe a little bit more drive, a little bit more energy every single night. And maybe we finally get that complete, total breakout season for Chris Kreider. I mean, he's always been a very, very good player for this team. But is he ever going to have one of those years where he's just the man every single night? I think maybe you slap the C on him. Maybe it gives him that kind of that incentive to do that. That's just kind of my fear.
Talk to me a little bit about the health. I mean, Capo Caco, how far away is he, and some of the other players who have been banged up early this year?
Yeah, so the big two are Capo Caco, as you mentioned, and also Ryan Strome has missed a good chunk of the season as well. Strome is on the COVID list. Caco suffered an injury and was placed on the IR, but the Rangers are hopeful that he will only spend the minimum of 7 days required on the IR. And it's sounding like, we're recording this Sunday night, it's sounding like that both Strome and Caco could be back in the lineup as early as tomorrow night's game against the Calgary Flames. So that would obviously be a big help to this team because those are two of the top six forwards. Vitali Kravtsov at this point, that's a whole other saga in and of itself, but it doesn't sound like he's coming back. So the sooner these guys can get healthy, get back in the lineup, the better, because right now, the biggest struggle of the Rangers, and I'm surprised that I'm saying this, but the biggest issue for this team has been creating offense, scoring goals, creating scoring opportunities in general. The power play has been pretty bad. I mean, let's just call it like it is. 3 for 24 just is not going to get it done. And you're basically missing 2/3 of your second line with Strome and Caco being out of the lineup. So they've had to just kind of piecemeal it together. I think they've done a decent job with it and, found other ways to win games. But yes, it will be a sight for sore eyes when both of those guys get back into the lineup. And like I said, it could happen as soon as Monday's game against the Flames. We hope that it is.
You mentioned Kravtsov. I was going to get to that, so why don't we do that now? How do you see this playing out, and what do the Rangers hope to get when this does finally resolve itself?
What I've been hearing is kind of the rumored the appropriate price for him, or whatever you want to call it, is that the Rangers are probably looking at a second-round draft pick in exchange for Vitali Kravtsov, which is kind of unfortunate because, I guess at this point you got to take what you can get because they're not playing him and they're obviously at odds with him. So really trading him is just about the only path you can go down unless you can somehow mend this bridge and get him to come back. But yeah, this is somebody that the Rangers just 3 years ago took with a number 9 overall pick in the draft. And we had the whole saga with Lias Anderson a few years ago. The Rangers ended up having to ship him out of town. And now it looks like the same thing is going to be happening with Vitali Kravtsov. This can't keep happening. You can't keep swinging and missing at draft picks like this, especially guys that you take in the top 10 overall. So it's really an unfortunate situation. It's a situation where I don't really think anybody comes out of it looking all that great. Kravtsov didn't make the opening night roster. And yet the Rangers had guys like, Julien Gauthier, who I kind of like, but the Rangers haven't really been using him. He's been a healthy scratch more often than not. Libor Hajek looks like he's going to be the 8th defenseman at best, and he's been, a healthy scratch every single game this season. And I think a way that you could have made this work if you're the Rangers, you just trade one of those two guys I just mentioned for, either Julien Gauthier or Libor Hajek. You do it for, 4th or 5th round draft picks, something like that. And just like that, you've now opened up a spot for Vitali Kravtsov. And they didn't want to send Hajek or Gauthier down to the minors because they'd have to expose them to waivers to do that. But they're not using these guys anyway. And now you're at odds with somebody that you took number 9 overall. So to me, placing one of those guys on waivers and trying to send them to the AHL, you risk losing them for nothing. But I think it would have been worth it for the purposes of hanging on to Vitali Kravtsov. Or if that doesn't work, trade one of them. And then you've got a spot for Kravtsov as well. But Kravtsov, he has not handled this ball either. By now, he would have been called back up because, as we already talked about, we had, Capo Caco out of the lineup with an injury, and we've got Ryan Strome on the COVID list. He definitely would have been called back up by now. So nobody handled it well, and it's a complete mess. And I think the only thing the Rangers can do at this point is look to trade him.
Your early impressions of the coaching staff so far?
Yeah, I like it. Gerard Gallant, I did not necessarily call them out, but I called him to question the idea of starting Alex Georgiev on opening night against the Capitals, simply because that's a game that the Rangers had circled on their calendar. We know everything that happened last year. We don't have to rehash all that stuff with Tom Wilson and all that. But yeah, that was a game that, I assume every player on the Rangers badly wanted to go in there and win that game. They basically got run off the ice. And to go with your backup goalie on opening night, just kind of an odd situation. But beyond that, I think they've done a really nice job. I think they've handled the lineup pretty well. And Gerard Gallant said at his introductory presser, and it's something that he continues to kind of hammer home, he wants this Ranger team to be the hardest working team in the NHL. And I think the guys have really embraced that. You watch these broadcasts on TV, and guys get back to the bench, and their faces are all red, and they're breathing heavy and trying to get some oxygen. And like I said, they haven't been scoring goals. So they've really had to grind out every single one of these wins that they've gotten. The 4-game road trip, I mentioned that they won all 4 of the games. All 4 of them were basically 1-goal games. 2 of them had empty netters at the end, but for all intents and purposes, those are basically 1-goal games. And so I think they've kind of embraced this vision of, we're not always going to win with talent. Sometimes it's going to take some grit and some determination, and there's going to be nights where maybe we're not even the best team on the ice, but we'll find a way to get it done anyway. The game against Toronto was a great example of that as well.
All right, John, why don't you tell our listeners and viewers where they could find your podcast and where they could find you on social media?
Yeah, so I mean, the podcast, you can find it anywhere you get your podcasts. And as far as social media, you can find me on Twitter at JCheck17. And then there's also the social media, the Twitter handle for the podcast itself, which is at LO_NY_Rangers. Definitely give us a follow and check out the next episode of Locked On New York Rangers.
All right, John, thanks so much for joining us today.
You got it, Gil. Thanks for having me, man.